Dad, we voted you off the family trust. My children announced at Christmas dinner. They raised their glasses in victory. I didn't argue, just pointed to Article 7. My youngest grabbed the document. Her face went pale. Any beneficiary who votes to remove another forfeits their entire share. Let's start from the beginning. I want you to think about the most important dinner of your life. Not important because of the food. Not important because of the decorations or the music playing in the background. Important because it's the night you realize that the people you gave everything to, every late night, every sacrifice, every dollar, were sitting across the table from you, waiting to bury you alive. That was my Christmas. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't see something coming. You spend 61 years on this earth. You develop a sense for when the weather's about to turn ugly. My knees ache before it rains. I can feel a bad deal before the paperwork hits the table. But your own children? You want to believe the best. You train yourself to explain away the signs. You tell yourself you're being paranoid. Turns out, I wasn't paranoid enough. My name is Walter Brennan. I build things. Always have. Grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Middle of nowhere for most people. The whole world for me. My father, Ray Brennan, worked a factory floor until his back gave out at 53. He died 2 years later. No savings, no legacy. Nothing but a closet full of flannel shirts and a handshake reputation that didn't pay a single one of his medical bills. I swore I would be different. And I was. 40 years of work. 40 years of brutal, relentless, get up before sunrise and go to bed after midnight work. I moved to Nashville in my late 20s with $6,000 in a savings account and a contractor's license fresh off the printer. I built Brennan Development from a two-man operation working residential remodels in Brentwood to a company with 400 employees and over $340 million in assets. Hotels, mixed-use developments, commercial real estate stretching from Tennessee into Georgia and the Carolinas. I did not inherit this. I did not marry into it. I did not stumble into it. I bled for every inch of it. And I did it all while raising 3 kids, mostly on my own, because my wife Diane spent the last decade of her life fighting a disease that had absolutely no interest in being fair. Diane. God. She was the kind of woman who made everything quieter just by walking into a room. She was the one who softened my edges, who remembered birthdays and made sure the kids felt seen even when I was buried in construction bids and zoning meetings. When she got sick, really sick, I tried to be both parents. I was terrible at it. You can't replace what she was. She passed 3 years ago, this coming February. 47 days in that hospital. I was there, every single one of them. My kids? Grant made it for the last week. Melissa flew in twice. Jenna sent flowers. She actually sent flowers to the hospital room while her mother was dying. I told myself they were young, busy, overwhelmed. I made excuses the way parents do because the alternative, accepting what that said about who they'd become, was too painful to sit with. So I swallowed it, filed it away, and kept loving them the way I always had. That was my first mistake. Nashville, in December, is a specific kind of cold, not the vicious, wind tunnel cold of the Midwest, but this damp, gray chill that settles into your bones and doesn't let go. The city was dressed for Christmas. Lights on Broadway, wreaths on the doors of the old houses out in Belle Meade, where I'd moved after the business took off. I'd spent 3 days cooking for that Christmas dinner, Diane's recipes. Ham glazed exactly the way she used to do it. Brown sugar, whole grain mustard, a splash of apple cider that she always said was the secret nobody ever thought to ask about. Her sweet potato casserole, her apple pie that my daughter-in-law Bethany once described as a little heavy, and which I will never forgive her for. I set the table with the good china, the stuff Diane picked out when we bought the house in 2003. I even found her Christmas playlist on an old iPad, the one she'd labeled Home in capital letters. I was, genuinely, trying. Grant arrived first, my oldest. 38 years old, Wharton MBA, VP of Brennan Development, and the single most expensive suit wearer in the state of Tennessee. He kissed me on the cheek and immediately checked his phone. His wife Bethany brought a bottle of wine that I guarantee cost more than my first truck payment and handed it to me the way people hand things to waitstaff. "House smells great, Walter," she said. Walter, not Dad. She's been doing that for 4 years, and I have never once let myself react. One day, it will be in a true crime documentary. I just know it. Melissa and her husband Connor came in behind them. Connor Pike, investment advisor, teeth like a toothpaste commercial, handshake like a politician, eyes like something that lives at the bottom of a lake. I never liked him. Diane didn't like him either, and she liked everybody. She told me once, quietly, in the kitchen so nobody could hear, "Walt, that man is always calculating something." She was not wrong. Jenna was last, my youngest, 29, curly hair, the same eyes as her mother, which has always made things more complicated than it should be. She hugged me at the door, and I held on a beat too long, because I'm 61, and my wife is gone, and some days, that's just what you do. We ate. The food was good. I know it was good, because I made it, and I'm not humble about cooking. The conversation was the usual careful navigation of topics. The company, the housing market, a cousin's wedding nobody particularly wanted to attend. Normal enough on the surface. But I noticed things. I noticed that Grant and Connor kept exchanging looks. Small ones. And the kind you only catch if you're watching for them. I noticed that Melissa laughed a little too hard at things that weren't that funny. The way people do when they're nervous and trying to perform casual. I noticed that Jenna wouldn't look at me directly for more than 3 seconds at a time. I noticed all of it, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Then Grant stood up. He actually stood up, like he was about to give a toast, which, and I want you to understand this, my son Grant has the energy of someone who has been practicing this moment in the mirror for weeks, maybe months. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the trust." And the temperature in that dining room changed, just like that. He laid documents on the table, formal, organized, tabbed with those little colored sticky flags. Someone had paid a lawyer to put this together, and that lawyer had not been cheap. "As a family, we've made a decision." He gestured to Melissa, Connor, Jenna, Bethany, all of them. "We've voted, under the provisions that allow beneficiaries to restructure trustee authority, to remove you as primary trustee and primary beneficiary." I looked at each face at my table. Melissa was staring at the centerpiece. Jenna was staring at her hands. Bethany had the faintest smile. I clocked it immediately. Connor raised his glass. Actually raised it. "To new beginnings," he said, like he was in a movie he'd written himself. And they all drank. My 3 children and their spouses, at a table set with their mother's china, eating food cooked from their mother's recipes, drinking wine to celebrate removing me from everything I'd built. I sat very still. I have been in rooms with people trying to take things from me my entire career. Contractors who cut corners and then tried to blame engineering. Investors who smiled at closing and sued 6 months later. City council members who wanted their palms greased in ways I refused to accommodate. I know what a shakedown feels like. I just never expected to feel it in my own dining room. On Christmas Eve, with Diane's apple pie cooling on the counter, I didn't yell. I didn't stand up. I'm not a man who performs emotion for an audience, and these people had just revealed themselves to be exactly that, an audience. I said, very quietly, "Did any of you read the full trust document?" Grant exhaled, indulgent, like he was dealing with someone slightly confused. "Dad, I helped draft it. No, I said. My attorney drafted it. You signed where you were told. I reached across the table and tapped the stack of papers. Article 7. Nobody moved for a second. Then, because God has a sense of humor and apparently wanted me to have one good Christmas memory from this disaster, it was Jenna who grabbed the document. Jenna, my youngest, with her mother's eyes and her mother's instinct for when something is deeply, catastrophically wrong. She found the page. I watched her lips move as she read it silently. The color left her face so fast it was almost clinical. Read it out loud, I said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Any beneficiary who initiates, participates in, or votes in favor of removing another beneficiary from the trust automatically and irrevocably forfeits their entire share. Said share reverts to the remaining beneficiaries who did not participate in the removal action. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. Connor's wine glass slipped from his fingers. Genuinely, actually slipped. Red wine across Diane's white tablecloth. I'm going to remember that until the day I die. That can't be enforceable, Grant started. Delaware courts, tested twice. My attorney is very thorough. I pushed my chair back, folded my napkin. You all voted unanimously, which means you unanimously handed me everything. Grant's face went through about 6 stages of grief in 4 seconds. I would have found it more satisfying if I hadn't also felt like I was watching 3 people I used to carry on my shoulders reveal that they'd been planning to drop me for years. Dad, wait. Melissa was reaching across the table. I buttoned my jacket. The same jacket I wear to every Christmas dinner because Diane bought it for me in 2019 and told me it made me look distinguished. I wear it every year, whether it's in style or not. Merry Christmas, I said, and I walked out. I drove home in the dark, along roads lit up with Christmas lights, past houses full of families who were hopefully doing better than mine, and somewhere on Franklin Pike, I pulled over and I put my hands on the steering wheel and I breathed through something I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just anger. Anger would have been simpler. It was grief. Again. Still. A different shape of it, but grief. Because my children had just looked me in the face and told me, without saying the actual words, that I was worth more to them as a deposit than as a father. And the worst part? The very worst part? I hadn't even told them what else was in that document yet. What I'd actually spent the last 6 months building. What Tommy Novak had found. What every single one of them had done behind my back for years, while I sat across from them at holiday dinners and made their mother's recipes and tried, God help me, to keep this family together. Article 7 was just the beginning. I sat in that truck for 45 minutes. Engine off, heat bleeding out into the December cold. Christmas lights blinking from the house across the street, some family's idea of festive. A giant inflatable Santa, waving at me like everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I kept replaying it. The looks on their faces. Connor raising his glass like he'd just closed a deal. Bethany's little smile. Grant's rehearsed speech. The way Melissa couldn't look at me. The way Jenna stared at her hands like a child caught stealing. They had planned this, coordinated it, probably practiced it. My own children had held meetings about how to take everything from me and then scheduled the execution for Christmas Eve, while I was in the kitchen glazing a ham with their dead mother's recipe. Who raised these people? That thought hit different, because the answer was me. I raised them, or I tried to, and somewhere along the way, between the construction sites and the zoning meetings and the hospitals and the funerals, something went very, very wrong. I drove home eventually, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat in the dark living room with the tree lights on, Diane's ornaments, the ones she collected from every city we ever visited together, and I let myself feel it. Not the anger, not yet. The sadness, the bone-deep exhaustion of realizing that the people you would have died for were calculating your net worth while you were still breathing. I thought about calling someone, but who? My brother lives in Arizona, and we talk maybe twice a year. My business partners would be horrified, but also immediately start calculating liability exposure. I have acquaintances, colleagues, people who respect me. But friends? The kind you call at midnight on Christmas Eve when your family just tried to rob you legally? Diane was that friend, and Diane was gone. So I sat alone, and I drank alone, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, the sadness started to curdle into something else, something colder, something that felt a lot like clarity. The next morning, I made coffee, and I called Tommy Novak. Tommy is 67 years old, retired FBI, spent 30 years chasing white-collar criminals through paper trails most people couldn't even see. He's built like a refrigerator that learned accounting, speaks in a voice that sounds like gravel being poured into a bucket, and he owes me a favor from 2019 when I hired his daughter into the company's finance department after nobody else would give her a chance. "Walt," he said when he picked up, "Merry Christmas. I need you to look into my children." Silence. Then, all 3 of them. All 3. Their spouses too. Everything. Finances, business dealings, anything that doesn't add up. I want to know what they've been doing with my name and my money for the last decade. Another pause. Tommy's not a man who asks unnecessary questions. That's why I called him. "This gonna get ugly?" he asked. "It already is." He grunted. "I'll start tomorrow. You okay?" "No, not even close." "I will be," I said. "Thanks, Tommy." I hung up and stood at my kitchen window, watching the gray Nashville morning. The house felt bigger than it ever had. Emptier. Diane used to fill every room just by being in one of them. Now it was just me and the coffee maker and the quiet hum of revenge starting to take shape in my chest. I didn't hear from my children for 3 days. No calls, no texts. No panicked voicemails begging me to reconsider. I imagine they spent that time screaming at each other, blaming each other, hiring lawyers to find a way out of the trap they'd walked into with their eyes wide open. Good. Let them scramble. On December 28th, my phone rang. Jenna. I let it go to voicemail. Listened to her message while I was eating breakfast. "Dad, it's me. I wanted to talk. About Christmas. I think there was a misunderstanding, and I really want to explain my side of things. Can you call me back, please? I love you. I love you." 3 words, easy to say. She'd said them 1,000 times, at graduations, at her mother's funeral, at birthday dinners, and random phone calls, and every Christmas for 29 years. But now, I heard them differently. Now I heard the price tag attached. I didn't call her back. Not yet. I was waiting for Tommy. He came to the house on New Year's Day, sat across from me in the living room with a manila folder that was thicker than I expected. "How bad?" I asked. Tommy set the folder on the coffee table. "You want the summary or the details?" "Summary first. I'll read the details when I need to throw up." He almost smiled. Almost. "Grant's been embezzling from the company for 6 years. Shell companies, inflated vendor invoices, kickbacks from subcontractors. Total amount, best I can figure, is around $4.2 million. I closed my eyes. $4 million. My own son, the VP of my company, the one who sat in board meetings and talked about fiscal responsibility and long-term planning while he was bleeding the business I'd built with my hands. "There's more," Tommy said. Of course there was. "Connor Pike, your son-in-law, the investment advisor." Tommy's voice went flat. "He's running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme. Not technically, not legally, but close enough that the SEC is already circling. He's been using your family name to recruit high net worth clients, promising returns he can't deliver, shuffling money around to cover withdrawals. It's going to collapse. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, but it will collapse. And Melissa. She's co-signed on several of his client agreements. She knows. She might not know the details, but she knows enough to be legally exposed when it falls apart. I picked up my coffee cup, set it down. My hands weren't steady enough to drink. Jenna? Tommy hesitated. First time I'd ever seen him hesitate. Just say it. Your youngest has been selling information about Brennan Development's land acquisitions to a competitor. Sterling Properties. Small amounts, maybe 50,000 total over 3 years. But consistent. Bid information, zoning intel, internal projections. It's securities fraud, Walt. Not the kind that gets you 20 years, but the kind that gets you banned from the industry and put on a watch list. I stood up, walked to the window. The same window I'd stood at a week ago when I called Tommy. Same view, same gray winter light, different man looking at it. They were all stealing from me, I said, not a question. In different ways. Yeah, my children, my blood, my legacy. And they couldn't even wait until I was dead. What do you want to do with this? Tommy asked. I watched a car drive past. Normal people living normal lives. No idea that a few hundred feet away, a man was learning that everything he'd believed about his family was a lie. Nothing yet, I said. I want to wait. Wait for what? For them to think they've gotten away with it. For them to relax. For them to stop looking over their shoulders. Tommy gathered his folder. That's a dangerous game, Walt. Evidence can disappear. People can cover their tracks. Not if they don't know anyone's watching. He studied me for a long moment. You're not the same man I did that favor for 5 years ago. No, I agreed. I'm not. The thing about revenge is that everyone thinks it's hot, passionate, explosive. Movies show people screaming and throwing punches and burning down buildings. Real revenge is cold. Real revenge is patient. Real revenge is setting traps so quietly that your prey walks into them while still believing they're the hunter. January in Nashville felt appropriate. Gray skies, bare trees, everything stripped down to its bones. I spent 2 weeks doing nothing visible. Went to work, attended meetings, smiled at Grant across the conference table like nothing had happened. Let him think the trust situation was still being worked out by lawyers. Let him believe that his father was too hurt and confused to fight back. Meanwhile, I was building. First move. I announced a routine third-party audit of Brennan Development. Standard practice. I told the board. Good governance. Transparency for our investors. Grant's face when I made that announcement was almost worth the $4 million he'd stolen. Sweat, son. You should be sweating. Dad, is this really necessary? He asked after the meeting, following me to my office. We just had an internal review 6 months ago. Internal reviews can miss things. Fresh eyes are healthy. It's going to cost a fortune. The disruption alone. Are you worried about something, Grant? He stopped. Processed. Smiled. That smile he'd learned at business school. The one that was supposed to project confidence, but always just made him look like someone trying to sell me a timeshare. Of course not. Just thinking about efficiency. That's my boy, I said. Always thinking. I let him leave. Let him spend the next several weeks trying to move money around, hide paper trails, create explanations for invoices that didn't have explanations. Every move he made to cover himself would leave new evidence, new trails for Tommy to follow, new rope to hang himself with. Second move, Connor Pike. This one required subtlety. I created a shell identity. Easy enough when you've been in business for 40 years and know how to form an LLC. Robert Garrison became a new client of Pike Financial Advisory. Deposited $200,000. Requested detailed quarterly statements showing exactly where my money was being invested. Connor, greedy as he was, didn't even do basic due diligence. He saw the deposit amount, saw the potential for more, and welcomed me aboard with the same handshake he'd used the first time I met him. "I'm going to enjoy watching you fall." Every statement he sent me was evidence. Every promise he made was documented. Every lie was recorded. Third move, Jenna. This one hurt the most, if I'm being honest. She was my baby. The one who used to fall asleep on my chest while I watched football. The one who cried at Diane's funeral until she couldn't breathe, and I held her and told her it would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. But she'd been selling me out for 3 years, while I was grieving, while I was trying to hold this family together, while I was making her mother's recipes and setting her place at my table. At an industry dinner in early February, I mentioned casually to a few colleagues that I was aware someone had been leaking Brennan Development bid information. Didn't name names, didn't point fingers, just put it out there, let it float through the Nashville business community like smoke. I knew it would get back to Jenna. Everything does in this town. A week later, she called me. Her voice had that edge to it, that nervous energy. "Dad, I heard something weird. Someone said there's a leak investigation at the company." "Just rumors, sweetheart. You know how people talk. But you're not actually looking into anything." There it is. The fear, finally. Why would I be? I trust my people. She laughed. Too loud, too quick. "Right. Of course. That's what I figured. Just wanted to check. I appreciate you looking out for me, Jenna. Always, Dad. Always." She hung up. I imagine she didn't sleep well that night. Good. Fourth move, the dinner. In March, I invited all 3 of my children to the house for what I called a reconciliation dinner. I apologized for being cold after Christmas. Said I'd overreacted. Said I was revising the trust to restore their positions because family was more important than money. None of it was true. All of it was bait. They came. Of course they came. Grant wore humility like a borrowed suit. Melissa actually cried, which might have been convincing if I hadn't seen her practice crying to get out of trouble since she was 8 years old. Jenna hugged me and whispered that she loved me, and I felt absolutely nothing. That was new, that absence of feeling. I'd spent so many years loving these people that the emptiness where that love used to be was almost interesting. We ate. We talked. I served Diane's recipes again, deliberately, and watched them choke down food made from the woman they couldn't bother to visit while she was dying. Connor made a joke about restructuring client portfolios. Grant mentioned the audit shouldn't find anything because I moved the accounts. Melissa admitted helping Connor clean up paperwork. They said all of it. In my dining room. With the security camera I'd installed in January, recording every word. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen and watched the footage on my laptop. Their voices tinny through the speakers, their confessions crystal clear. You handed me everything, twice. I closed the laptop. In 6 months, I would destroy them. Carefully, systematically, in ways they wouldn't see coming until it was far too late. But first, I needed them comfortable, confident, certain that their sad, grieving, easily manipulated father had forgiven everything. I poured myself a drink and raised it to the empty chair where Diane used to sit. "I'm keeping my promise," I said to nobody. "I'm taking care of our babies." Then I smiled. For the first time since Christmas, the real work was about to begin. Spring came to Nashville the way it always does. Dogwoods blooming along West End Avenue. Tourists flooding Broadway before the summer heat made it unbearable. Everything green and alive and renewing itself. Everything except my family. They thought they were safe. I could see it in the way Grant walked into board meetings now. shoulders back, confident. The audit was dragging on. I made sure of that. And he'd convinced himself that his shell companies were buried deep enough, that his tracks were covered. Melissa had started posting on social media again. Vacation photos, restaurant meals, her and Connor, smiling like people who didn't have SEC investigators, circling their business like sharks smelling blood in the water. Jenna texted me every few days. Little things. Thinking of you, Dad. Saw this and thought of Mom. Love you. Each message, a small performance. Each one, documented in my files, along with her bank records showing deposits from Sterling Properties. They were comfortable. Good. I started in April. The SEC complaint was anonymous, detailed, comprehensive. Every transaction Connor had shuffled, every client he'd misled, every return he'd promised that didn't match actual market performance. I didn't write it myself. Tommy had a contact, a former regulator, who knew exactly how to phrase these things so they couldn't be ignored. The subpoenas arrived at Pike Financial Advisory on a Tuesday morning. Connor called Melissa. Melissa called Grant. Grant called me. Dad, have you heard anything about Connor's business? Some kind of investigation? I was sitting in my office, looking out at the Nashville skyline. Same view I'd had for 15 years. Same city I'd helped build, one project at a time. Investigation? No. What kind of investigation? I don't know. SEC, I think. Melissa is freaking out. Good. She should be. That sounds serious, son. Is there anything I can do? I don't know. I just wanted to give you a heads up in case it affects the family somehow. Affects the family. That's rich. Thanks for letting me know, Grant. Keep me posted. I hung up and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of satisfaction before moving on to the next phase. The audit results came back in May. I'd timed it carefully. Let the external accountants do their work. Let them find the discrepancies. Let them trace the shell companies back to Grant's personal accounts. Let them document $4.2 million in what they politely called irregular disbursements. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Grant walked in like he always did, coffee in hand, phone buzzing, that Wharton confidence radiating off him like cologne. Then he saw the faces around the table. I've been in rooms where deals fall apart, where partnerships dissolve, where people realize that the ground they were standing on was never solid in the first place. But I'd never seen my own son experience that moment. Part of me wanted to feel something, sympathy, sadness, fatherly instinct to protect him. I felt nothing. Grant, I said. Please sit down. He sat. The audit report was already on the table in front of him, tabbed, highlighted, undeniable. The board has reviewed the external audit findings. There appear to be significant irregularities in vendor payments over the past 6 years. Payments that trace back to companies you control. His face went through stages: confusion, realization, fear, and then, because he was my son, and I knew him better than he knew himself, anger. This is a mistake. These accounts were documented, thoroughly, along with your digital signatures on every transfer authorization. The board members were silent. Most of them had known me for 20 years, built projects with me, trusted me. Now they were watching me dismantle my own son in a conference room that still smelled like the coffee he'd brought in 5 minutes ago. The board has voted, I continued. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. The company will be pursuing full restitution of the misappropriated funds, and we will be referring the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Grant stood up so fast, his chair hit the wall behind him. You can't do this. I'm your son. You were my son when you were stealing from me too. It didn't seem to matter then. His face twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before. Or maybe something I'd always refused to see. This is revenge. This is because of Christmas. Because we tried to. Because you tried to rob me. Yes, partly. I kept my voice level, calm. But mostly, it's because you've been robbing me for 6 years, Grant. While I was sitting next to your mother's hospital bed, while I was planning her funeral, while I was trying to hold this family together, you were stealing. He had no response to that. What response could there be? Security escorted him out. I watched him go. My firstborn. The baby I'd held in the delivery room in 1986. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike in our old driveway in Brentwood. Gone. Good riddance. The dominoes fell faster after that. Connor's SEC investigation expanded. Clients started demanding their money back, money that didn't exist anymore, because he'd used it to cover withdrawals from other clients. The Ponzi scheme, and it was a Ponzi scheme, whatever technical definition said, was collapsing in real time. Melissa called me 3 times in one day. I didn't answer. She showed up at my house on a Sunday morning, mascara streaked, hair unwashed, looking like someone who had finally realized that the life she'd built was made of cards. Dad, please. I didn't know what Connor was doing. I just signed what he told me to sign. I trusted him. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. You trusted him, but you didn't trust me. That's not. At Christmas, you sat at my table and voted to take everything from me. You raised a glass with Connor and celebrated. You trusted him then. I made a mistake. You made a choice, Melissa. There's a difference. She started crying. The same crying she'd been doing since she was a little girl. The same crying that used to make me pick her up and hold her and tell her everything would be okay. Not this time. The prosecutors are offering you a plea deal, I said. 3 years if you testify against Connor. I suggest you take it. Her face crumpled. You're not going to help me? I'm your daughter. You stopped being my daughter when you tried to steal from me. Now you're just someone I used to know. I closed the door, stood there, listening to her sob on my porch until she finally left. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee and felt absolutely nothing at all. Jenna was last. The FBI raid on Sterling Properties happened in June. Summer heat pressing down on Nashville like a weight. They found everything. The emails, the bid information, the payments. Her name was all over it. She didn't come to my house. She called. Her voice was small, broken. The same voice she'd had at 5 years old when she fell off her bike and scraped her knee. Daddy, I need help. Daddy, not dad, daddy. The word she hadn't used since she was 12. She's trying to manipulate me. Still, even now. I can't help you, Jenna. Please, I'll lose everything. My license, my career, maybe my freedom. Please, Daddy, I'm begging you. You should have thought about that before you sold me out to my competitors. Silence. Then, how did you know? I know everything. I've known for months. More silence. I could hear her breathing, ragged, desperate. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Because you tried to destroy me. All 3 of you, together, on Christmas Eve, in your mother's house, at her table. And you would have done it too, if you'd bothered to read the document you were using to bury me. It wasn't personal. It was my life, Jenna. My life's work. My company. My legacy. The thing I built to take care of you and your siblings forever. And you tried to steal it. So don't tell me it wasn't personal. I hung up. The news broke in waves over the summer. Brennan family dynasty implodes. Embezzlement, fraud, insider trading. 3 siblings facing federal charges. The patriarch, Walter Brennan, cooperating fully with investigators. Grant's trial was scheduled for September. Connor's for October. Melissa took the plea deal, 3 years, minimum security. Jenna cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for probation and a lifetime ban from the securities industry. They turned on each other, of course. Grant blamed Connor for bringing crime into the family. Melissa blamed Grant for being too greedy and obvious. Jenna was frozen out by both siblings for cooperating. The family I had spent 40 years building was finally completely destroyed, and I had done it myself. Grant's sentencing hearing was in November, almost a year since that Christmas dinner. The courtroom was cold, fluorescent lights, hard wooden benches, nothing like the movies. Grant stood before the judge, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Prison orange didn't suit him. Nothing about this suited him. The judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement before sentencing. I stood up. The courtroom went quiet. Grant turned to look at me. His eyes were hollow, defeated. For the first time in his life, he had no angle to play, no move to make. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm here to ask for leniency for my son." Grant's whole body jerked. Surprise, confusion, hope. Grant made terrible choices. Choices that hurt me, and hurt this company, and hurt everyone who trusted him. But he learned those choices somewhere, maybe from me. The judge leaned forward slightly, interested. I was so focused on building a legacy that I forgot to build character. I gave my children money instead of time, opportunities instead of values. I taught them that success was measured in dollars, and they learned that lesson too well. I paused, took a breath. I'm not asking you to absolve him. What he did was wrong, and he needs to face consequences. But I am asking you to consider that he might still become someone better. I'd like to fund an education program in the prison system, in my late wife's name, so that other people who've lost their way might have a chance to find a path forward. The judge was moved. I could see it in his face. Grant got 6 years instead of 12. He would be out by the time he was 45, young enough to rebuild something if he chose to. Outside the courthouse, he approached me, hands shaking, eyes wet. "Dad, I don't understand. After everything, why would you?" "Because your mother would have wanted me to." I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the boy he'd been once, underneath all the damage, and because destroying you completely was never going to bring her back, or bring back the children I thought I raised. He started to speak, stopped, started again. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad." "I know you are." I put my hand on his shoulder. Once, briefly. Maybe someday that will matter. I walked away. 6 months later, I finalized the new trust. Diane's cancer research charity would receive 60% of everything. The Brennan Development Employee Scholarship Fund would get 30%. The remaining 10% would go into a trust for my grandchildren, Grant's 2 kids, Melissa's daughter, accessible only when they turned 30, and only if they'd never been convicted of a crime. My children would receive nothing. I drove out to the cemetery on a spring morning. 1 year and 3 months since Diane had passed. The dogwoods were blooming again, everything renewing itself. I sat by her headstone for a long time, told her about the grandchildren's trust, about the scholarship fund in her name, about the garden I'd planted around her grave, finally blooming after the hard winter. "I kept my promise," I said. "I took care of our babies, just not the way either of us expected." The wind moved through the trees above me. For a moment, it almost sounded like her voice, almost sounded like forgiveness. "I think I'm ready to live now, Dee. Really live." I stood up, brushed off my pants, walked back to my truck, still the same old Ford I'd been driving for 10 years. The for sale sign had gone up on the family estate last week. I was moving somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere without ghosts in every room. My phone buzzed. A text from Tommy Novak. "Golf Saturday?" I smiled. First real smile in over a year. "Sounds good," I wrote back. Then I started the truck and drove away. The cemetery got smaller in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. The revenge was complete. But somewhere along the way, something else had happened too. I had let go of the anger, of the family I thought I had, of the life I thought I was supposed to live. The road ahead was empty, open, mine. For the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.